Welcome to the Office of the Leader of the Opposition's press conference for December 20th, 2022. Today, I'll introduce my panel. Of course, from my right, there is none other than the Leader of the Opposition, Mr. Aubrey C. Norton, Member of Parliament. To his right, Mr. Marvin Williams, and to his right, Mr. Elson Lowe, economist. Welcome. All right, so today's press statement will be read by the Leader of the Opposition.
The PPP continues to fail the people of Guyana. 2 years plus of PPP rule has made it manifest that the PPP is incompetent, divisive, corrupt, and is making the lives of Guyanese worse by doling out the resources of this country to its elite friends, families, and favorites, while allocating crumbs to the people of Guyana, thus forcing them into hardships, hopelessness, and a life of poverty as they fail to create the 50,000 jobs they promised. As we near the end of another year, the occasion presents itself to evaluate the changes in our quality of life and our destiny as a country and as a people over these last 12 months. As citizens, we need to ask ourselves, are we better or worse off in our homes, our workplaces, our communities, and in our society? Are we more or are we less financially and economically secured and empowered? Are our concerns, grievances, and demands better addressed? Are we more confident of and hopeful in the future? At the start of the year, the PPP government promised that 2022 would be a turning point in the destiny of Guyana. In unveiling the nation's first oil budget, 50% larger than the previous budget, the minister responsible for finance stated that the government, I quote, is battened down in its resolution to serve the cause of unifying the people of Guyana and at the same time to ensure that the lives of all Guyanese are meaningfully, demonstrably, and lastingly improved, unquote. Clearly, these are mere words. The reality is that we are worse off. Instead, the PPP has made 2022 one of the hardest years on record for Guyanese. On the economic front, the cost of living keeps surging, while the government showed no urgency, no capacity, and no genuine care to ease the burden on the people. Poverty and inequality increased. Living from paycheck to paycheck led to more misery. Many parents, especially single parents, cannot afford to feed, much less clothe and house their children. Hopelessness stalks the land. From as early as January, we in the opposition called for a range of urgent people-centered responses, such as a comprehensive anti-poverty plan, a 25% plus salary increase for public servants, healthcare workers, teachers, and other state employees, $10,000 plus increase in old age pensions, the removal of income tax for low-income earners, multi-billion-dollar investments to revitalize depressed communities, and a massive grant scheme to spur the startup and growth of micro to medium-scale businesses. As the cost of living continues to spike during the year, and with the government still demonstrating indifference and incompetence, the opposition further called for a cap on fuel prices and for a waiver of water and electricity payments for low-income households. All of these demands were rejected. These measures would have brought direct relief to our people and would have put income in their pockets. The rejection of these proposals is a clear indication that the PPP regime does not care for the people of Guyana. The government seems singularly focused on promoting large, most times infeasible projects aimed at giving a significantly large portion of our nation's resources to their elite friends, families, and favorites, while delivering crumbs to the people who should be the real beneficiaries of our oil income. Moreover, we noted the persistent inflow of unexpected high oil revenues occasioned by the Russian invasion of the Ukraine. We pointed out that this oil windfall equated to $300,000 per household and proposed that this money be equitably and transparently distributed in a structured and focused way to the people of our country. Again, PPP rejected this people-centered proposal. The government instead preferred and still prefers to lavish its attention and the country's bounty on its friends, families, and favorites. Whatever cash transfers it doled out to citizens were one-off, selective in coverage, inadequate in amount, and are politicized and discriminatory in its allocation. Whatever salary increases it awarded public employees were already eaten up by high inflation and its concomitant high prices. Our people are no better off because it is too little, too late. The real income of our people has declined since their present income is purchasing less goods and services compared to 2020. The year 2022 also witnessed the unceasing erosion of the rule of law, democracy, good governance, and basic human rights. The list of PPP transgression is very long. These transgressions have resulted in most people concluding that Guyana is an authoritarian society hurtling towards dictatorship. We declared months ago that as a result, the nation faces a political crisis. We pointed to such abuses as the continued corruption in high places, foremost among which remains the Sugate allegation of bribery and abuse of public office swirling around VP Jackdale, and the government's refusal to investigate these allegations. 2. The use of Suku and the entire police force for political intimidation, oppression, and the violation of human rights while protecting the police from legal challenges, thus promoting and condoning lawlessness. 3. The sabotage of the Public Accounts Committee to prevent it from scrutinizing the people's money spent by this regime is a clear indication that the PPP is bent on squandering the nation's resources while not being accountable or transparent. 4. The continued disrespect for communities in opposition strongholds and the practice of bribery as the sole means of obtaining political support. 5. Discrimination in the award of contracts and employment opportunities. 6. The callous demolition of homes and stalls of innocent, hard-working Guyanese, especially in APNU and AFC strongholds, while treating their own strongholds differently, even if they are in similar situations. 7. The non-invitation of opposition representation on state boards and the non-access to the state media. 8. The obsession of the PPP with political domination and control and the concomitant rise in executive lawlessness. 9. The exclusion of civil society in making decisions on issues of national importance. These and other abuses by the PPP have made a lie of its self-delusional One Guyana mantra. As some have pointed out, One Guyana, the apparent new national motto, sounds more like one party rule. As we near the year's end and assess all the money spent and all the attacks suffered by ordinary citizens, one thing is clear. The PPP has either foiled our development or has taken us backward at all levels and in all spheres of society and economy. Guyana is worse under PPP rule. The PPP's 2 years in government is a clear indication to all that the APNU AFC did a better job at governing Guyana. We in the opposition believe that Guyana can and has one of the world's highest standards of living, should have. We believe that Guyana can be one of the world's happiest societies. We believe that Guyana can achieve the goal of zero poverty and zero misery. Unfortunately, we are experiencing zero transparency and zero accountability. We believe that Guyana can be a model of democracy and good governance, and the only obstacle for that stands in our way is the incompetent, divisive, corrupt, and secretive PPP regime. Guyana could only achieve the ideals we espouse if there is a caring and competent administration. We intend to be that administration. Permit me also to, on an obligation I made at the last press conference, I undertook to look at our press statement to see what is said in it and then to deal with the issue. Our press statement said on the issue that was raised, all we will ask at this point on sport is for the Minister and the National Sports Commission to show Guyanese where the $2 billion allocated to the development of sport has gone. Revelation by our national athletes, including national boxer Kevin Allicock, have indicated that those billions have not gone into helping them. Anybody who reads this and reads it rationally will recognize that at no stage did we say Kevin Allicock said what the journalist purported we would have said about him. I hope it is clarified, because at no stage did we say that he said $3.2 billion allocated to the development of sport was wasted. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, at this time we will open up the floor for questions on the press statement, and we will take by the raise of hands and, what is customary for you to state your media houses. Questions on the press statement.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Mr. Harris.
Good morning. Morning.
All right. Statement. The use of SOCO and the police for intimidation. Isn't there a legal recourse to prevent such action, bearing in mind that the Police Act determines the operation of the police? Or are we saying that even at the level when the police should be brought to book, there is a force that is nullifying the prosecution?
First of all, I think you're well aware that the Director of Public Prosecution, under the law, has the authority to withdraw cases. And she has been doing that with impunity. Even though in an exchange with the CCJ, it was suggested that it's an outdated practice that doesn't fit modern day governance. We have to look at not only the Police Act, but all elements as they relate to the Constitution, and to probably bring legal action in the court. One of the things this government is occasioning is a whole plethora of legal actions because of their attitude. You would have seen that a lawyer whose right has been violated, who was clearly arrested wrongfully, attempted to get redress in the courts, and the DPP proceeded to withdraw the charge on some frivolous ground. So we think the DPP is not operating in the spirit of the law, and therefore we might have to end up challenging these legally.
All right, thank you.
And if I may ask one other question. You talk about people living paycheck to paycheck. Now recently, there were interesting salary adjustments for the discipline service and for health workers. Would you care to hazard a guess why similar adjustments have not been made for public servants and teachers?
When you are an authoritarian regime, you have to try at best to keep the police and the Guyana Defense Force from being annoyed with you. And so I don't think it's an interest in the police or the Guyana Defense Force. It is an attempt to placate them so that they can continue to use them even outside the confines of the law. If one looks at the joint services, one would have seen that when we were in government, they were treated just as other workers. But the significant difference is this. We were given higher increases, and unlike what this government is doing, when we gave the increase, it was retroactive to January, and people didn't pay tax on it. They set up the joint forces and the police to jump up and go on as if something great had happened. But every policeman and soldier unit said, oh, whether we know that we got more under the APNU, AFC, and we know that they're just seeking to dominate and control. So they are fooling no one. Our position has been and continues to be that we need to treat all public servants, all public workers equally. As it relates to the nurses, the reports coming in is that the nurses are leaving the hospitals in droves. And right now there's a crisis in the health sector because of these departures. I think it's an attempt to stem that. But even if even the increases you would have suggested you were giving to these health workers are not adequate. And so they are not likely to stem the migration that they hope to stem. But it is my considered view that is an attempt to halt or ease the migration of medical professionals, and that might have occasioned it, rather than a concern for the health sector and health workers.
One thing I'd like to add to that is that, of course, we've been calling all year for the substantial increases, not these small increases, but substantial increases across the public service. But Adam, I've got a joke for you. So we saw an increase in the national budget of around about 50%, and we saw that some of these increases announced were in that order. Now, me thinking that any caring, genuine government would make the 50% retroactive, given that the budget is 50%, I assumed that it would be retroactive. And to my shock, it was not retroactive. That is the level of madness that you're seeing in this government, where you've got a much larger budget, 50% larger, and they have not made the increases retroactive, which now means that these same healthcare workers are missing out on how many millions of dollars that they should have been compensated. This is so absurd, and I have to find it hilarious on my own end that I assuming that the government wanted to help these health workers. Me of my naive self was thinking that. But that's not the case, because they have now robbed the health workers of millions of dollars. And this is the trend that you're going to see going forward. So I don't know if you find my naivety funny, but I was very disturbed to see that this is not retroactive.
You mean the section for the health workers?
Yes, yes.
Okay,
For the health workers.
because people can mix it up to say none. Okay.
All right. I have a question coming from Shamar Allen of Nightly News, and he asks, with the year coming to an end, what grade would you give the government and why?
Well, if there's a grade below F, I would have issued that. But look, if you're judging a government, you have to judge them on the political front. On the political front, they are pursuing domination and control. They have no interest in inclusion, in keeping in the constitution. They have politicized the Ghana police force. Therefore, on the political front, they score extremely badly. On the economic front, the average man will tell you he is or she is no better off now. We have not seen an attempt to create businesses, to create employment. And so on the economic front as well, the government has done badly. But that is compounded by high levels of corruption, which makes it worse. If you have the level of corruption in this society, corruption deprives people of resources. And this government is not only corrupt, it is incompetent. And you see the incompetence. They came and they met a plan to put a road from Soesdijk to Mary area, Soesdijk to Ogle. For many, it was well thought out. I should go back. The incompetence of Jack Deo, he created on the East Bank a situation where there is traffic jam because you put a housing scheme with one entrance, one exit. That threw the traffic on the East Bank, and we would have lost millions of dollars in delay time in traffic jams. As I recall, when Patterson was there, we were talking about that road that I just mentioned. And what would have happened was that you would have had ancillary roads. So as people meet a point where they have to go into the East Bank, they could come off and go into the East Bank. What that meant is that people who were not going into Georgetown didn't have to come into Georgetown to get to the East Coast. This dumb government goes and put this road to come into Sheriff Street. We had warned them, I warned them more than once, that they were creating another bottleneck. So Guyanese are now faced with two sets of traffic jams. The old one on the East Bank and a new one on Sheriff Street. Sheriff Street has become a nightmare because of government's incompetence and the lack of vision. And then they add insult to injury by now claiming to widen the road next to the American school and to take off the traffic. Well, that makes no sense. First of all, the road leads straight to a trench, and therefore you will not be able to cross from Prashad Nagar straight over to Lamaha Gardens. And even if you are, you have to end up back on Sheriff Street in the confusion. Clearly, this government is incompetent. They don't think. And so they are wasting our money on the economic front. If F is the lowest grade in politics, then we got to find a lower grade for the handling of the economy. We come now to the social sector. In the social sector, the employees in the Ministry of Social Services are calling for the removal of the minister. The incompetence is that manifest. The government has developed no coherent social program to deal with the social problems in the society. What you have, according to the staff there, is she always announcing some initiative. I don't even know it should be called that, because the word initiative presupposes some kind of positive. But the social service sector is in trouble. Everywhere you go, people are complaining that they are taken off of the social assistance program arbitrarily, even if they fit whatever criteria they would have established. So they have now politicized social services. No longer could people say that they are in need, and based on some objective criteria, they can get assistance from the government. That has been politicized. It is now managed or mismanaged because of incompetence, and therefore a grade somewhere between Z and F will be applicable. The reality, and when I was talking about economics and accountability, I should have mentioned the Public Accounts Committee. The entire government stood up in the parliament when we were saying they're changing the quorum. And Guyanese must understand what had happened. Throughout the history of this country, the Public Accounts Committee is responsible for holding the government accountable, scrutinizing the accounts. Throughout the history, you just had to have 3 members, I think it was, to hold the public accounts. What that meant, if 3 opposition turn up and 1 PPP, or 3 on the other side, once you would have gotten 3, you had a quorum. They changed that to say you must have 2 from government, and I think 2 from the opposition plus the chair. Now what that did is to put in the hands of themselves a tool. Now the biggest problem is that the accounts for 2020, where the corruption is rampant, and 2021 are next in line for scrutiny. So they put this mechanism, and what they do is they do not turn up for Public Accounts Committee, so the Public Accounts Committee cannot meet to scrutinize them. That also is an indication that they know that they are corrupt. So in the economic realm, they have removed transparency and accountability from government accounts.
Just to add on this note, one of the things that I think is useful for us, sometimes when we ask government how they performed, is to judge them by their own metrics, by their own goals. And we had the government say that they intend to increase, this is an article from the DPI, they intend to increase education expenditure to 20% of the national budget. Now this year, education expenditure actually fell from about 15–16% last year to 13% or so this year. So we've had a fall in education expenditure as a share of the budget from one year to the other. But we've not even hit the 20% goal that they themselves had set. And since these remarks were made, we've actually seen a supplemental budget passed with virtually nothing there for education. Now we recently saw the Chancellor of the University of Guyana, bless her heart, indicate that $600 million is owed to the University of Guyana. we had called for all student debts to be written off. When I saw the $600 million figure, again, this is a press conference where a lot of laughing will have to take place. I was laughing because that's one day of oil revenues for the country, and it could be wiped out instantly. And so the government could easily have wiped out everyone's University of Guyana student debt with only one day's revenue, and they could have done that in the last supplemental. There is also talk again about University of Guyana being free in 2025. In what planet does University of Guyana need to be free in 2025? There is currently, just from the excess revenue that Guyana earned this year, enough revenue to make the University of Guyana free for 15 years straight, and that's just the excess revenue. I think that the PPP has been so focused on trying to steal everything in sight that they themselves have been struggling to get a grasp on what is expected of governance of Guyana now that it is a wealthy country. We have said that we intend to see one of the best education systems in the world in Guyana because we have the resources to do that. The University of Guyana being free is one leg of it. But we will make the University of Guyana one of the best institutions in the world. We'll make Guyana's education system, from the bottom right up to the top, one of the best in the world. And that is a core element of our people-centered vision. What we're seeing here is PPP saying we're going to spend X amount and not even living up to their own words. So if you can't even meet your own expectations, how can you say that you're anything other than a failure?
Also, one has to understand the crux of the matter here. The government does not believe in human resource development. And the fulcrum of development is human resource development. There are many countries with resources that haven't developed. But if you look at the common trend of countries that develop, you will see the focus on human resource development. This government doesn't focus on human resource development. If you have an oil and gas sector now existing, one would have thought that the government would have had a human resource development plan to be able to audit and monitor the oil sector. But they haven't. If you got an agreement in which you are sharing in profits, you have to develop the institutional capacity to be able to audit and monitor oil. The government is showing no interest there. If one is talking about the development of Guyana, one should see a focus on training people in the technical fields, more architects, more engineers, so that your country has the capacity to, the human resource needed to push the development. It is one thing to say you're going to go into the diaspora and ask people to come. But if you don't create conditions propitious to them coming, then they wouldn't come. So all this talk about coming, and who wants to come to Guyana, and virtually everything you have to pay a bribe for. But the incompetence is not only limited there. Let's go back to the APNU, AFC coming to government. When we came to government, we worked with the city council, and we, in a structured way, began the cleaning of Georgetown, the drains, etc. Rain fell, and even if there was the minimal flooding, by the time the rain was over, because your drainage is in order, the water was running off. They come to power with the old approach of stifling the city council of resources, and they didn't clean. They didn't have a structured approach to cleaning. And then comes the rains of 2022. So they are now fighting to clean. And as they clean, the rain is putting back everything in the drains. And flooding is occurring. Flooding in Georgetown has to be placed squarely at the feet of the PPP. I remember visiting Border Market, and vendors commenting while we were in government that they were happy that there was this reduction in flooding. In the last couple days, Guyana has been made long boots Guyana. Anywhere you go in, you have to get a long boots. And yet, they are telling us about these billions they put in a budget. Money in a budget is one thing. Money being used to satisfy the needs of the people is another thing. And in this case, we're saying to you, with all these monies they are talking about, education is deteriorating. The cities are deteriorating. Health deteriorating. So the reality is the incompetence and corruption have been affecting us negatively under this government.
If I may, on the question of indigenous rights, we got to go somewhere down to Z. That's a great here, because the PPP thrives on the violation of indigenous people's rights. They have failed to recognize the importance of the universally acclaimed right of indigenous peoples to free, prior, and informed consent. They have refused to consult or engage with the indigenous population of this country as they steam-boated their, what is it called? LCDS 2030. And only after intense criticism did they, and following the passage and approval of this policy, did they actually seek to engage a select few indigenous villages. They have refused to act on the violations of the rights of the people in Chinese landing. They have refused to address the question of the rights of the Wapshan people in the Rupununi, specifically as it relates to mining and mercury-laced waters affecting people's lives now and in the future. They have refused to attend to the reports made to the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. They have refused to engage indigenous peoples on development taking place within their titled villages. They have established kangaroo courts to remove elected indigenous leaders in their villages simply because those leaders are believed not to be supportive of the People's Progressive Party. They have engaged international agencies. They have marketed carbon credits. They are talking about money to be received from the sale of carbon credits, largely from lands owned legally by indigenous peoples without reference to the indigenous peoples who are the owners of the lands, owners of the forests, and who have from time immemorial been guardians and keepers of the forests of this country. As far as the indigenous peoples are concerned, it is disrespectful. As far as the People's National Congress Reform and the APNU AFC are concerned, it is a violation of the rights of indigenous peoples that cannot be encouraged, that is rebuked in the strongest terms. It is rejected, and better must be done. Before the APNU AFC demitted office, we had a process of consultation countrywide with respect to reviewing the Amerindian Act. We have received and documented, and we have lodged those documents with what is now the Ministry of Amerindian Affairs. Those documents were deposited to the office of the Permanent Secretary. They are records of the government of Guyana. The indigenous peoples of this country believed that this process would have been proceeded with, would have been continued with. To their shock, this PPP administration has discontinued that consultative process and is hell-bent on ensuring that the Amerindian Act is not amended, that it is not strengthened to be reflective of the will of the indigenous peoples of this country, and that it does not protect the rights in a stronger way and in areas which this current act does not address, because the People's Progressive Party does not care about indigenous peoples. A simple example is that they went into Muritaro. Muritaro had prepared, in keeping with the policy of the then Ministry of Indigenous Peoples Affairs, Muritaro had prepared a 10-year village improvement plan. Two of those projects on that program had to do with the establishment of a health center within the center of that village. Well, one, sorry, I'll not deal with the other one. The People's Progressive Party went in there, ignored the decision of the village general meeting to place that facility in the center of the village, and proceeded to put it several miles outside of the village center. So that people now have to travel twice, in some cases 4 times the distance that they would have originally done to get the medical attention. And in fact, let me tell you about the second one. The second one had to do with the construction of a housing facility for teachers within the village of Muritaro. What did the PPP do? They took a contractor in there and they constructed a facility for housing of teachers miles removed. They live within the village in a very remote area, accessible like the health center only by boat. Now, nobody is going to teach in Muritaro because nobody is going to live that far away from where people are. It is not safe, it is dangerous, and the PPP does not care. They're just concerned that they can award a contract to their friends, that they can get the building completed and get their friend paid. No regard whatsoever for indigenous peoples. And the law provides that decisions of this nature must be made by no less than 2/3 of the persons present at a village general meeting. So when it comes to indigenous rights, they've been trampled upon, they've been ignored. The PPP operates as though they do not exist. Indigenous peoples only matter when the time comes to ask them for a vote. They will simply buy a tractor and take it in, and that's it. Absolute disrespect. It has to be rejected. It is hereby rejected, and they are awarded an X.
All right. I have, I see the hand of Mr. Jevon Vickery.
I have 3 questions. My first question is to Mr. Norton. You've basically given the government Fs across the board. Isn't there, people might say that it's ironic that as the opposition, you would go ahead and do this, but isn't there one thing that the administration has done? We're not asking for an A or a B, maybe like a C or a D. Isn't there anything that you see that they have at least made an attempt, so as a government, that's one. My second question is...
You want me to deal with the first one, then you bring the second one?
Sure, go ahead.
We have long said that we believe our people should access resources from oil. We have long said we agree that there is need for transfers. But having said that, let me say to you, we are glad that the government did transfers. And there's a positive in transfer. However, the government has reduced its grade by making it unstructured, by making it discriminatory, and COVID grants will tell you the story, by involving political activists in its distribution rather than public servants, and also by not using these resources to target poverty and deal with poverty. They have been politicizing it and using it for political bribery. And that we condemn, though we agree that our people need transfers. And we condemn the corruption that goes with it. So we think it's a positive to transfer resources to our people, but the way the PPP is doing it is not in the way it should be done, and it is not in the interests of our people in the long term.
And when you say transfers, you're talking about things like monies in terms of grants, one-off grants. Could it be investment into other sectors? Because we see people might look at this and say, but they provided scholarships.
They provided what?
Free of cost.
Scholarships.
You know, these are all positive things.
Could I say this about scholarships? The provision of scholarships in itself might be good, but scholarships have got to be provided in the context of the economy. You doing scholarships, let them tell us how many people were trained in urban planning, so that these scholarships, when these persons are finished, they'll be able to contribute. Let them tell us how many mining engineers are being trained. Let them put out the list of the people being trained, and that will show us whether it's discriminatory or not. But not only the list of who have been trained, for which sector they have been trained, and an assessment of the impact on the sector. For instance, what is the level of training that the government is doing on the goal that will allow us to audit oil revenue, that will allow us to develop persons who can go into the oil and gas sector and be able to increase the amount of Guyanese that are competent and operating in the area. Why is it this government says it believes in scholarship and goal, but it refuses to give law scholarships? Let us analyze what happened in terms of law. Over the years, the government did an assessment and concluded that the two groups that do not have the capacity in large measure to fund their law training are essentially the Afro-Guyanese and the indigenous people. Over the years, they have removed scholarships so that it reduces the amount of poor people, including poor Indians, from accessing scholarships. What that means is that the poor man, the small man who has some amount of empathy for people in their position will not be producing lawyers. The elites will produce lawyers, and it will continue the domination and the lack of representation of ordinary people under the law. When you, as a government, train lawyers, and I don't have to say you have to train them disproportionate to the need, but you are an elitist, classist, upper-class government when you deprive ordinary Guyanese, regardless of ethnicity, of realizing their potential in a particular field. Law is a particular field of study in which there are some people who will just want to do law, but now lack the capacity financially, and there is no government structure to help them to do law. And that impacts negatively on poor people, because many of them will get jail because they lack the ability to take a high-flying lawyer, and there will be very few lawyers who are sympathetic to the poor and prepared to do pro bono and help them. So this one is far-reaching. So don't just tell me about goal. let us make gold transparent. And if you make gold transparent, and when it is made public, we see the transparency in it, I am prepared to up the grade. But for now, the goal in achieving its goal.
Leader, if I could just quickly build off of that. As much as we want to see young people get access to higher education, we have to point out where people are being shortchanged. Now, the increase in gold scholarships has not been anywhere near the 50% increase of the budget. So what has happened is the government is spending a smaller share of these revenues on scholarships like gold, despite now having access to the oil revenues. Folks, as we as young people say, broke thinking got left behind. And these people with this kind of approach to education got left behind. This is totally unacceptable, totally unacceptable. How is it that you now have access to oil money and you're shrinking the scholarships that you're offering? You're not serious. And so even when they offer something, it is not what you're supposed to get. And we as young people across this country have got to recognize how we're being shortchanged and demand more. Because PPP is happy to give you a little drip here, a little drip there, and feel that they are really doing something for young people when they're leaving them behind. That's the first thing. The second is, of course, we mentioned it, the leader mentioned an area where we're happy to see some cash transfers and so on. One other area that the government acted in a way that is good is that they finally raised the minimum wage. And of course that minimum wage has to be raised much further than that. But can you imagine that we had to come at this press conference here and call them all sorts of things and say how they're disgusting us, have the newspapers say that their actions are unacceptable before they raise that minimum wage? Even when they do something good, it is as if they're dragging the foot and they don't want to do it. That is the attitude that the government has taken all year.
Mr. Vickery?
Yeah. My second question is, we see that the Deputy Finance Minister last week calling the announcements of the increases with the health sector being phase 2. We see since the announcement of the joint services and the health sector, we see that the percentage of the increases are different in some sense with teachers and other sectors to go. Do you see as an opposition that this will create some amount of issues, something, or could you say, well, would you say that something as good as increases could eventually become chaotic because people might feel shortchanged because of the difference in the percentage? Or would you agree that it should be across the board, one raise across the board?
Well, we have already said it should be across the board, and so we believe it should be across the board. We have pointed out that it is being used as a divide and rule tool, where you're making some in the public service, you appear to be giving them a better life, even though the resources are inadequate, but at the same time, you are depriving teachers, etc. So it is an indication that the government does not have a holistic approach to the development of the country and the various sectors and people involved. You just have to look at transfers. I went into the Barbish River. The government announced a riverine transfer. Till now we know what's riverine, or what you consider to be riverine, because if it's a village or a city on a river, Georgetown qualifies. So you don't know what that is. You say you're delivering to fisher folks. I went to Riverton on the East Coast, and people tell you more taxi drivers get than people who just fish. So we don't know on what basis you did it. You went into Linden, you fetch a set of people and claim you were giving grants for agriculture. I went to West Watuka where most of the people in Linden planting, and they tell you apart from a PPP woman and one other person getting, the whole of West Watuka was not given this so-called agriculture grant. I pointed out here before that in Region 6, the government had been given $250,000 and up But when they came to Baracara in the Kanji River, it suddenly went down to 50. So one has to question the intention of any government that does the things that the PPP doing.
Thank you.
I have one more question. I didn't ask for three. My final question is, do you believe that it's time for the government to maybe look at a price regulation unit? When I say price regulation, I mean we see every year when governments, even when ACNU was in government, every time an increase is given, something goes up, the market becomes somewhat unbearable to even shop. Because, you know, of course, in economics, you see that the private sector doesn't get anything from a government for the price, so they would usually, you know, call for a bit more money on the price. Do you think that there should be price regulation to ensure that what is given now in terms of increases could be sustainable, rather than have it, you know, be dissolved in the services, the private sector, so forth?
First of all, history has shown that price control doesn't necessarily result in better prices and a better quality of life for people. A government can develop policies, and in developing those policies, they would need to move away from the so-called trickle-down economics. A lot of times, the government says we do this and we give it to the private sector with the hope the price will come down. Don't forget, if it's not this budget, the last budget, the government set $1 billion a set of markets, places, so that the farmers could bring the thing directly to the people and the price will go down. That turned out to be garbage. What a government needs to do is, one, develop clear policies to guide the private sector. Provide incentives where it is needed to increase production, because it is well known that with increased production, you will reduce scarcity and prices will tend to stabilize rather than go up. Now, having said that, you have to deliver a living wage. We have said on more than one occasion that there's need for an assessment of what constitutes the minimum livable income. And we need to provide that minimum livable income. In providing it, we must know that if you increase the income without the concomitant increase in production to ensure more goods and services, it would lead to inflation. And so we call for a livable income with the economic measures to ensure there is increased production, services, etc., so that the price wouldn't escalate. We have agricultural lands. We need to be developing a program to help those who are in agriculture, put more people in agriculture. We need to develop cottage-type industries with government support so that we continue to increase our production, which will give more goods and services to our people, help to stabilize prices. If you just push money in the system without the various measures to ensure it stabilizes, I don't think it would. And therefore, I am not a supporter of price control. Price control with a corrupt police force will increase the corruption. Once you have got to put people to deal with these prices and to ensure they stay there, a price control squad or whatever you call it, you will also create new avenues for corruption rather than solve the problems. You just had to look at COVID and see the minute you started to do out of the blues, people start selling COVID vaccine cards, etc., and the corruption that goes with that kind of control things.
All right, thank you. I see the hand of Ms. Garnett.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's Nikki from the Ghanaian Chronicle.
Good afternoon.
I want to ask two questions pertaining to, start off with two questions pertaining to the statement. Mr. Norton had earlier said that he spoke about jobs and that the government had not created the 50,000 jobs that they had spoken. Can you say how you determine that the government has failed to create jobs?
First of all, the high level of unemployment. Now, we also visit communities. The major cry in every community that I have gone to is the need for a job. I can put you to sit in front of Congress Place, I mean figuratively, and you will be able to see the amount of people. And in the areas where jobs are created, they are discriminating in the allocation. The persons from the Ministry of Social Services who wrote the president on what is happening in social services indicated that the minister, or alleges that the minister, brings one set of people from one organization, and people who apply for the jobs, have the requisite skills, don't get it. Add to that, that when the government came to power in 2020, it went on a program of firing like 3,000 public servants, many of whom are still to find a job. Now, the government went to Linden and said they had training for jobs. They trained the people. And when you go to Linden and talk to those persons, they haven't got a job until now. Let us not forget that the government went to Linden and announced this call-in center. What they haven't told people as yet is that all the people they claim to have employed, most of them are gone. And the center is virtually closing. All of those are clear indications that employment is not being created. And you are not seeing the emergence of small to medium-sized business that are absorbing the unemployed. So, I have arrived at that conclusion from one, the levels of dismissals, two, the amount of people that you engage in communities, and I invite you to go to Little Africa, go to Little India. I was just in Karivaton, where a young Indo-Guyanese boy told me, and I think we have it on tape somewhere, that I support no government in the future because this government promised we employment, and until now we can't get anything. All across the country, people of all ethnic groups are complaining that they cannot find jobs.
Additionally, if you have created substantive employment, why would you create temporary jobs in the numbers that you have? For the persons who are now receiving $40,000 per month for temporary employment, do you know what they're doing? They, particularly in Region 3, are being employed to cook food for the children in school. They are being employed to take census. They are being paid to do political work, forming party groups, forming WPO groups, forming PYO groups, being elected to positions in groups, and being remunerated by the $40,000 per month, which is earmarked for part-time employees. It's a disaster.
But it is important to note, we have been saying to these persons, many of them don't have income. So we've not been saying to them, don't take it, take it. But know that this government is not delivering on their promises, and a $40,000 would make you vulnerable and have to go to the functions that they send you to. But it cannot determine how you vote. And that is the issue at hand.
Building off of that, the $50,000 job, the 50,000 job
40.
number is a number. The 50,000 job number is a number that various economists have spoken about when it comes to the total level of unemployment in Guyana. So for you to see 50,000 jobs, or a little bit more than 50,000 jobs, you'd see virtually no unemployment in the country. And I think that many people would agree that we don't see that situation. The second thing that I'd say regarding, and this is an important note about the difference between the coalition and the way that we think about training and job opportunities in Guyana and the way the PPP thinks about it, is when it comes to these temporary jobs with $40,000. Yes, we're happy to see people get some income and so on. But did it really not occur to the PPP that you could give people $40,000 as a stipend and put them to train so that they could get a higher income job? This is the type of nonsense that you're seeing in this country when it comes to governance. The difference in the lives of those same people who are temporarily employed under a coalition government versus a PPP government is drastic. It is life-changing. And so we have to recognize what's going on when we see it. That is to say that PPP is perfectly happy to give you a little something to keep you quiet, rather than giving you access to the real opportunities that you are supposed to get. We want to build an opportunity society. We are not here to hold anybody down and control them. We want Guyanese to flourish. And so that is what you're going to see in our policies. And that's why we've talked about student stipends, to help people to go back to study and to give people an incentive to move themselves forward and therefore get the high income jobs in our economy, as opposed to just a 40,000.
It is also important to note that the PPP cannot afford an educated society. A society in which people are educated, they will challenge the nonsense that is ongoing. And therefore what they're doing is creating a dependence type society which they hope to control and dominate. I think they haven't learned from the previous time in government. Our people sit quiet and at the right time do the thing and get rid of them. Because the reality is what they're doing cannot and will not improve the quality of life of our people.
All right. I think you have one other question, Ms. Garnett, and then I see Ms. Christina.
Are we taking questions outside of the statement as yet?
Your other question
You
is
can go ahead with that?
No.
Outside of the statement? Yes. Can Mr. Norton confirm that the General Secretary of the PNCR has put in her resignation, and can you shed any light on the reasoning or possible reasoning behind it? And can Mr. Norton also say if he has yet received any official correspondence from the AFC pertaining to their confirmation that they will be leaving the coalition?
The answer to the last question is no. The first question, it is in the public domain. I've seen the letter, I think, in the public domain, confirming that the General Secretary would have resigned. In that letter, she said she continues to be a member of the executive, she continues to be a member of Parliament, and she continues to support the party. We are thankful for the service that she would have given, and we have initiated a process to consult so that as leader I can appoint the next General Secretary of the party.
Can you say anything about the treasurer? I saw a story that the treasurer was also either has resigned or has indicated their intentions to resign. Can you say anything about that?
Yes, the treasurer sent a letter, and again, we accept his resignation. He is also committed to working with the party, supporting the objectives of the party. For that, we're thankful. I've had a good relationship with both the treasurer and the General Secretary, and we'll continue to have that relationship.
For a lot of these people that are resigning, we're seeing that they are of a particular ethnicity, and this comes amidst some amount of accusation that the party has an ethnic bias. Do you believe this is indeed a case where certain persons are being excluded from various roles in the party, well, a certain ethnicity, or what are your thoughts on this perception that persons of a particular ethnicity are being excluded in the party?
Well, I think one of the things to do is to like interview somebody like Ganesh Maipal, talk to people of other ethnic groups. Marvin Williams on my right is not of an African Guyanese origin, and one would have seen that over the years the PNC had always had Indo-Guyanese in our party, and we continue to have them. We have some young ones who are in the party and doing work. At least 2 or 3 of them we don't want to expose because of the vicious nature of the PPP against Indo-Guyanese who support our party and against indigenous people who support our party. But I would say to you that the PNC has always been a party in which there is all ethnic groups. It is predominantly an Afro-Guyanese party. I think the world knows that, just as how the PPP is predominantly an Indo-Guyanese party. But when it comes to involvement of people in the decision making, regardless of your ethnic group, you are involved. We have Natasha Singh Lewis. You can interview her. You can interview people generally. I would not worry about what conclusion or what perception has been created. I always remind people that a lot of the people who are saying that the leader does not accommodate Indians, I want to remind them that the campaign manager and the person who supported Winston Murray as an Indo-Guyanese to become leader of this party, his name was Aubrey Norton and continues to be Aubrey Norton, who now happens to be leader of the party. I'm suggesting to you that long before I became leader, I was not only prepared, but I worked assiduously to make an Indo-Guyanese who I thought served the people of Guyana, had the competence, the skills to run Guyana, and so we supported him. Unfortunately, our medical system at the time failed him when he ended up at the hospital and he died. But I can say to you that the policy of the party is to promote Guyanese of all ethnic groups once they have the competence, skills, and commitment to our party.
All right, thank you.
And on the question of the AFC correspondence and how if they have not yet issued out a correspondence to the party, what is the next step given that they continue to affirm that they...
That's a question for the AFC.
All right, thank you. I see the hand of one Miss Christine. I ask that you also indicate your media house.
A pleasant good day to everyone. Mr. Norton, I'm actually following up on Tanika's question. In terms of the General Secretary of the party being replaced, you said there's a consultative process that needs to be followed. But could you say around when you expect that this process should be finished and a replacement to be named? And also, in terms of the Treasurer, a replacement update, please?
The Treasurer and the General Secretary, our Constitution stipulates 2 different things. In the case of the Treasurer, it's an elected member at Congress. In the case of the General Secretary is appointed by the leader. Now, my approach to these matters has always been to consult with people to find a person who is acceptable to most, if not all, in our party. When I appointed the first General Secretary appointed by me, I consulted. We agreed on the kind of criteria we will utilize for a General Secretary. We did that. On this occasion, we continue to consult, and I believe before the new year dawns, there'll be a general secretary of the party appointed. If not, before the new year dawns, very early in the new year.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. All right. At this time, as we are coming to a close, if there is any final question, I'll take it here outside of the press statement. If not, I want to thank you for joining our press conference today. This is the last press conference before we enter to the Christmas, so I want to wish you all a season greeting to our media personnel and those viewing us as well online. Do have a wonderful afternoon and Christmas holiday.